Is Trump softening after the China-Russia-India axis? Has China's muscle flexing at the Shanghai Cooperation Organization summit at Tianjin and the military spectacle and pageantry at Tiananmen Square, China's real show of might, set off a Trumpian softening on India? Or is there a hardening of its stance? Hello everyone, I'm Neena Gopal. Welcome to Global Express, where we peel back the layers on the events that have a direct impact on India and its neighborhood. Viewers, do click on the new Indian Express icon and share and subscribe. This week, the Trumpian tirade, as India seems to be widening its arc of allies, reinforcing its much touted strategic autonomy, continues to dominate the headlines. We get along with India, but they kill us with tariffs, was one charge. May Xi have a great celebration. Regards to Putin and Kim as you conspire against the US, was the other. There's no saying which way the wind will blow, whether the US president's intentions to make India play by his rules will change at all. But post the SCO summit in Tianjin, the bonhomie between Prime Minister Modi and the two global powers that challenge Washington's might across Eurasia, across the global south, China's President Xi Jinping and Russian President Vladimir Putin, was unmistakable. Was it staged for maximum effect? Probably. And when followed by the military parade in Beijing's Tiananmen Square, where China showcased its next-gen military firepower, Washington's current elite does seem more than rattled. Mr. Trump's tirade in the run-up to SCO may have played some part in Prime Minister Modi's animated display at Tianjin, spending nearly an hour inside President Putin's car, to which no one could listen into. What was that conversation about? And equally intriguing, what was the Xi Jinping-Modi meeting about? It's taken a year of painstaking conversations between the two special representatives to get from Galwan to Kazan to here. Was this the Modi-Xi huddle? Was this Modi-Xi huddle independent of Trump's tariff war in India, or did one lead to the other? Adding to the confusion after Trump slapped punishing tariffs on Indian goods, the ever-changing commentary from the Washington inner circle sending out very mixed messages. Will the tariffs stay in place? Our own Minister Piyush Goyal has said there would be a trade deal with the US in place by this fall. Talking to us today are a panel of experts. Ambassador K P Fabian has served at various Indian diplomatic missions, the most notable being Rome, Vienna in Canada, and of course Tehran, where he saw the Iranian Revolution unfold firsthand, and later Qatar, where he oversaw the repatriation of over 170,000 Indians during the height of the Gulf War, when Iraq leader Saddam Hussein walked into Kuwait. Prolific author, commentator on foreign affairs. Welcome, Ambassador Fabian. Also on the show is Mr. Atman Trivedi, partner at the Albright Stonebridge Group in Washington, founding member of the DGA Group. He leads the firm's South Asia practice. He's worked with John Kerry on India and South Asia on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee and was senior fellow at the Atlantic Council South Asia Center. Welcome, Mr. Atman Trivedi. And last but not least, Dr. Vivek Mishra, Deputy Director, Strategic Studies Program and Fellow, Americas at the Observer Research Foundation, whose focus remains US foreign policy. He's an expert in America's role in the Indo-Pacific and South Asia Indo-defense ties. Thank you, Dr. Mishra, for joining this program. Let's start with you, Ambassador Fabian. What has led the United States under President Donald Trump to reverse 20 years of a calculated policy to strengthen ties with India? Is India no longer seen as integral to the US's strategy of containing China, no longer trusted to keep South Asia out of China's reach? I mean, Pakistan, Myanmar, Nepal, it's all slipped out of India's grasp. Has India been able to keep up its end of the bargain? I mean, Bangladesh is a classic example of how Myanmar is manipulating things in the East.
Thank you, Neena. Always a pleasure to talk to you and through you to the hundreds of thousands of those who are going to listen to you.
Oh my God.
Now, let me start by confessing that I am no expert. My only advantage, or maybe disadvantage, is that I have been looking at these things for so many years. Now, coming to President Trump, before I deal with his tariff, tariff war with India, I want to make one point, and that is, it is possible that he might go to Beijing in October or later, and there could be a certain rapprochement. And in fact, I could be wrong, but it is possible that Trump has in mind a tripolar worldview. That is, a region where China dominates, a region where Russia dominates, and a region where America dominates. Of course,
That's
the
very
global south,
interesting.
the global south may or may not be part of that, but he couldn't care less. Now, coming to the sanctions, first of all, I want to seek a conceptual clarification, terminological. Trump speaks of secondary sanctions. Now, very technically speaking, secondary sanctions are like, say, America imposes sanctions on Iran, meaning it cannot export oil. Then any foreign company which imports oil from Iran is sanctioned, meaning it cannot do any business with the United States. And in the real world, imagine an Indian company importing oil from Iran in violation of Trump's sanctions. That company will not even be able to import anything from Italy because the Italian company will think twice before engaging with a company which the United States has sanctioned. So that is the real meaning of secondary sanctions. Now, instead of sanctioning the Indian companies importing oil from Iran, from Russia, well, I do not have the list, but you probably know who are importing. There are some private
Yeah,
companies. Okay,
correct.
instead of punishing them, Trump is punishing those who are exporting footwear, German jewelry, seafood, and all that. Okay, so there is a certain contradiction. In fact, it has nothing to do with India's importing oil from Iran and from Russia. It
From
has
Russia,
something to
yeah.
do with the personal anger which a man called Donald Trump has for another person called Narendra Modi. And this
Well,
has a couple of reasons. I will explain very briefly. One is that last year, when Prime Minister Narendra Modi went to New York for the UNGA, though his office had asked for an appointment with Trump, it was decided not to call on him. Now, simple diplomacy would have been calling on both the candidates anyway.
yeah,
Now,
yeah.
Trump's mistakes is personal. Secondly, Modi failed, in Trump's view, to acknowledge his role in pushing Pakistan in the direction of asking for a ceasefire. And third, the last conversation they had, 17th of June, if I'm right, uh, from Canada was very acrimonious. Trump, in all innocence, asked Modi to support to nominate him for the Nobel Peace Prize. That means
Oh,
Trump's aides had not been briefing him on what is happening.
yes, yes.
Not only that, Modi refused to accept Trump's invitation to pass by Washington. He
Correct.
refused Trump's suggestion that India and Pakistan should meet at a neutral place, Washington or Riyadh. And this has not come out, but I hear in Delhi, it could be wrong, it could be right. Apparently, Trump said that America is interested in running India's ports and airports.
I
And
see. Okay, that is new because all the other
Naturally,
points have been visited
yeah,
by
naturally,
most.
Modi refused it, and Trump had in mind his family business.
Okay,
So,
all
if
right.
the two men get together this time, something can happen. But the latest I hear, and I could be wrong, Prime Minister Modi is not going for the GA.
My gosh, that is quite a bombshell, Ambassador Fabian. If I can bring you in, Mr. Atman Trivedi, is Trump's trade and tariff policy a reflection of the US's new foreign policy towards India? Where Delhi is no longer given the kind of importance that it once enjoyed. I mean, we have this issue now about the US even trying to stop importers from increasing prices on food and food imports from India. When I was told that this is one of the issues that is stalling the trade negotiations. But that U.S. negotiations have been repeatedly arriving at a consensus with Indian negotiators, but when it's presented to the president, that all just sort of falls apart. So, what advice would you give, Mr. Trivedi, if you were advising Trump at this point, as you did once to John Kerry?
The focus that Trump has taken to India has been similar until relatively recently than the one he's taken with other longstanding trusted U.S. allies and partners. It's been well documented that the administration's focus is very transactional, short term, based on dollars and cents. And it's a simple calculus from his vantage point. Our country's running a trade surplus with the U.S. If so, they're seen as taking advantage of the U.S., and that needs to be corrected. And that's the basis on which he's conducting his foreign policy. I mean, India's, unlike in the past, not being given special dispensation for being a friend, for being aligned broadly on U.S. strategic interests as it relates in particular to East Asia and Pacific region. And its economic potential over the long term isn't being given a lot of weight as well. It's a very, again, short-term calculus that's driving the decision making in Washington. I agree with what Ambassador Fabian said. I think we, as geopolitical analysts, tend to impute grand designs or big picture strategy to the decisions that we're seeing. But this is probably more about personalities, a sense of who deserves credit, in particular for what happened in the aftermath of Operation Sindoor, and who produced the ceasefire. And the difference of views between the leaders, I think that's the driving factor in the visible differences that you see. Up until relatively recently, the president was noting how the sides were very close to reaching a trade agreement. And India and the U.S., by all accounts, had an agreement in principle. The negotiators on both sides were very comfortable with what had been negotiated. It was a compromise, give and take. And they ultimately arrived at what the negotiators felt was a satisfactory outcome.
And they did have 10 rounds of negotiations so far.
That's right. And, India was prepared to make historic gives from its vantage point. And the U.S. also tried to meet India halfway, and they had an agreement in principle again. But I think there are disagreements between the two leaders, that again goes back to who is responsible for the Sindoor ceasefire. And those differences are driving what we are seeing playing out in the media and over X and the social media sphere.
So, do you think, Mr. Mishra, that Trump is dialing it down a bit? I mean, he did keep up the line that India's huge tariffs on US imports were excessive. But he also yesterday actually described India as a friend. I mean, this is a friend that he's killing with tariffs. Could you tell us where you think this is going? Because India's minister, Piyush Goyal, has said a trade deal will be ready in the next couple of months. But that stands in the, it looks as if it's going to stall again.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Neena. I think what's important to note in that context really is that the social media narrative has gone much ahead of what is actually happening between the two countries. I mean, you had the 2+2 dialogue held very quietly between the Joint Secretary, America's Division, and the State Department without any news coverage as much as you see on social media in terms of what's happening. You had two other instances. You had the U.S. Embassy tweeting a very calming nerve tweet out, putting it out there for the Indian audience. And then you had Marco Rubio coming and tweeting in defense of India-U.S. relationship. So I think while Trump is and his intransigence is of course a factor that I don't think any of his team members can really cross. But what is important is that other team members, and especially at the highest level, somebody like Marco Rubio, has a better one-to-one relationship with the external affairs minister here, and I'm sure that the conversation there is on. But in terms of, and the last tweet of Donald Trump really sounded off-rampish. He actually hinted that there is a trade deal to be taken, and he said that India better do it fast, which means that is hinting at the possibility of grabbing this trade deal. But I'll add a caveat that all this, Trump, you never know where it goes with Trump, and therefore, because we had all of us who watch the India-U.S. relations very closely were relatively confident that the trade deal would come through, until you had Trump, crossing over on many instances. So I think eventually the decision will lie with the president, and how it unfolds remains to be seen. The question in my mind really is how much is really two or threefold. One is the agriculture and the dairy sector, whether one will open up the GM crops, which can be devastating for India's own economy, and what assessment that the Indian government makes there remains to be seen. And the second is there another way that to sort of Trump wants the 45 billion trade surplus that India has to come to zero. Now, what India has proposed really is that can there be a graded approach? I mean, we have struck a FTA with the UK where we have agreed to open up certain economies in a very graded way over a certain number of years. Now, what the difference with the US is that they want it in a knee-jerk fashion, and I think that's also a hindrance. So I think those are some of the nitty-gritties that I think both sides will have to mull out together in the next few months or weeks.
That's very interesting. If I can come back to you, Mr. Atman, the defense deals that have been struck with the US have been quite comprehensive over the last couple of years. And right now, Indian military forces are conducting a 2-week training exercise at Fairbanks, Alaska. It began even as Modi was meeting Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin at the SCO. And its emphasis is on interoperability between the two armed forces, with Indian officials saying it gives India a chance to explore operating in air and sea corridors in the Arctic and the Indo-Pacific. So that almost runs complete contradiction to this, the trade deal, which is sort of drowning in all of these semantics. Is this defense deal going to stay? I mean, is it something that could, given the huge noise that was made in Tianjin about India purchasing the S-400s from Russia, do you think it will still stand its ground? I mean, will it still hold?
You have two different sets of policy making being done in Washington. One are the policies being pronounced by social media posts and public press conferences by the White House. Then you have the policies that are being advanced by the rest of the U.S. government. So the rest of the U.S. government is moving forward with the 2+2 conversation that was alluded to earlier. This is working level conversations between the state and defense departments and their Indian counterparts. You have military exercises taking place, and you have signs that it's otherwise business as usual in the U.S.-India strategic partnership. Growing signs of strategic cooperation, efforts to increase interoperability of our armed forces, and that all goes to the central challenge of maintaining a free and open Indo-Pacific, as the U.S. side calls it. That's code for balancing China, and so that China balancing is quietly happening. at the same time that you have these social media posts and periodic uh, press statements coming out. But it's a bit of a confusing dynamic, and I think it reflects the view that official Washington is very supportive of a strong, durable partnership with India. It sees attaches very significant value to that partnership. The interests are aligned, and our societies and our software as countries, if you will, is very compatible in many respects. And there's a deep appreciation for that. And it's a bipartisan one that historically, over the last 25 years, both Republicans and Democrats have shared. Now, there are much more short term transactional calculations in play at the upper reaches of the U.S. government. But a number of the senior officials, if left to their own devices, I dare say would be taking a very different approach to the relationship than what we are seeing being reflected in the social media posts right now.
That's very interesting. Ambassador, if I can come back to you, Ambassador, I mean, where do you see India-US ties headed? Now, after the SCO, which was where there was all this, bonhomie between Putin and, Xi Jinping and Modi, I mean, it does look almost as if there's a new troika which is coming into, which everyone's talking about. I mean, it may be nothing, but conversely, I would also like to ask, what is India looking for? Does India need the US anymore, like it did, for the last 20-25 years? Is it also shifting its sort of trajectory, its alliances?
Well, let me put it this way. Certain things are contagious, like flu. Now, tension in the trade can be contagious, and it can affect India's relations with the United States in other areas too. There was mention of the 2+2 meetings, which went off very well. Well, we all know normally 2+2 is at the level of Defense Secretary, Secretary of State, Foreign Minister, and Defense Minister. Point number one. Our Defense Minister postponed his trip to the United States. So for anyone to argue that but for trade, Indo-US relations are in ship shape, well, that is contestable, to put it mildly. Now, as to what India should do, my view is that India did the right thing in strengthening its relations with Russia, China, and Japan and other countries, though, frankly, between you and me, going to China via Japan did not make much sense. Anyway, MEA should have advised better, but that's a different matter. I understand all that, but nevertheless, I am also of the view that we need to repair our relations with the United States, because let me tell you, there is a Center for Monitoring Indian Economy, and they have come out with a figure that in the first quarter of the financial year 2025-26, foreign companies investing in India have pulled back projects to the value of 1.9 lakh crore rupees.
I see.
Okay, so it's going to hurt. And if it continues, it will hurt more. And in any case, Trump is the president of the United States. One has to deal with him. It's not a question of, only Trump is doing all this. At other levels, they are all for India. No, that is slightly simplistic. Now, my view is that India should correct its policy towards course correction towards United States. Till recently, India has been embracing the United States. Now a tight embrace can make it difficult for you to breathe. What is required is to shake hands with the United States, talk to them. And I don't think at this moment India has access to the inner circle of President Trump. And my belief, I could be wrong, is that a conversation between President Trump and Prime Minister Modi is absolutely necessary. And you have seen reports that 4 times they wanted it and India refused. New York Times had carried it.
That's right.
I think diplomacy means talking. What you talk is different, but it doesn't mean not talking.
Yeah.
And I expect things to get worse before they get better. I fear.
Yeah. Dr. Vivek Mishra, if I can come back to you. I mean, a big deal was made about this last week about India and the US defense deals. There were reports that India had hit the pause button on a $3.6 billion agreement on the purchase of Boeing aircraft and the Stryker combat vehicles. Now, defense deals are never just about buying and selling. It's about geopolitical alignments. I mean, with the US making such a big play to bring Pakistan into its fold, and I know it's aimed at Iran and not so much at India, it still does put a huge question mark on India and the US. Our fighter aircraft need spares. If that stops, that will really throw a sort of a spanner in our wings. So what about this the deals? I mean, in October last year, India did sign a deal for the Sea Garden drones for the Navy and the Air Force and all of that. But that was huge. That was valued at $4 billion. What happens to all those various deals? You think that will still continue, or will that be a problem?
So my sense is, let me pick up from where Ambassador Fabian left. Things will get worse before they get better. And that applies to defense deals as well. I think it's a technical pause and it's a signaling because India-U.S. today are bound by 4 structural agreements, 4 strategic agreements, the Limoa, Kumkaza, Jismoa, and Becca. So I think those structural veins of the relationship cannot be really uprooted and thrown away by the Trump administration. Neither is there any attempt to be in that direction by the Trump administration. So I think those veins remain, and that's why I said that at the structural level, the state and the MEA will continue to talk. The Quad summit itself may get postponed, but I think it will not be off the calendar.
You think it will get postponed?
There's quite a likelihood, because I think there are media reports in the US which says that Trump has canceled his visit. Now, of course, he hasn't made any inclination to that. So at the most, I think it could get canceled. It could get postponed, but not canceled. So that's what I meant. But in terms of defense deals, my sense is that if you could, after Galwan, if you could go and shake hands with China to give optics to Washington, I think making up with Trump won't be that hard. And Trump is a businessman. He has come around with Zelensky like no other leader has. Zelensky has come around with. So I think at the level of state leadership, coming around from a fall is not a big deal. The second point, the other point that I wanted to make is that in terms of the defense relationship, it's been often quoted, and not just bluster, but I think out of numbers, it's quoted to be the strongest pillar of the bilateral relationship. And I think that will be much a driving force in the relationship. And the bilateral joint statement that Prime Minister Modi, when he visited in February earlier this year in Washington, came out. There's a strong insistence from Washington, and I'm sure this is on the back of Trump's insistence that India buy more defense and defense equipment, oil, all of that. And that was partly to boost the numbers and lessen the trade surplus that India has. Now, how that will play out is something that I think remains to be seen, and that will come in discussions. But I think the question for India is whether Trump will stop with that demand. Because as we can see in the case of Canada, as we can see in the case of Mexico, as we can see in the case of European Union, Trump hasn't stopped at that tariff demand. There are a laundry list of items that he wants from Claudia Sheinbaum in Mexico right now, which she's unable to give. So I think where does he draw the line, or does he at all, remains a question for India when India sits at the negotiating table.
So, Atman Trivedi, can we come back to you on the U.S. Sort of suspicion that India is firmly in with BRICS, to destroy the world's dollar dominance. U.S. is dollar dominance. Is that something that also colors the relationship in the U.S. and India? I mean, and the fact that India and China, if India is going to be was given the job of countering China, and that no longer is true.
I think there's a sense in parts of the administration, parts of Washington that while, as I said, there's strong support for moving forward with India, India also wants to have its cake and eat it too when it comes to international affairs. That the friendship with Russia, the effort, cautious effort, I would say, to begin the long process of normalizing ties with China, it creates some challenges there when you look at the interoperability of defense items, sharing of state-of-the-art technologies, and it creates a little bit of cognitive dissonance here in Washington, where we're used to having allies, very close partners, and there's not as much familiarity with this kind of more nuanced approach that prioritizes autonomy, multipolarity, and being a friend when it serves your interests. And so that whether it's the BRICS, whether it's the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, India's willingness to be flexible, its need to preserve optionality in its foreign relations, it causes a little bit of confusion at times in Washington.
That's interesting. That's very interesting. I mean, also Tiananmen Square. I mean, it was supposed to be about a celebration of, China and the Western countries defeating Japan and Germany and so on. But there was not a single Western leader present. And also, Japan is now a frontline Western ally. So there was a lot of confusion on what that Tiananmen Square sort of parade was all about. I mean, don't you think it was a lot more to do with China projecting itself as a counter to the US, not just a counter? I suppose it is, right? So I mean, then where does that leave India after the SCO? Because I mean, if India is going to mend fences with China, can China be trusted? There's a lot going on with China. It's not just the land border,
These are important questions that I think you asked that India's diplomacy can address. In the West, the Tianjin gathering that she hosted was seen as an effort on China's part to remake the world order, to remake international relations in a way that puts China at the center, displaces the United States and its allies in Europe, and to emphasize China's rise in its military power. That was reflected in the military parade. And so the optic of seeing, even though it was only symbolism, not as much substantive, but the symbolism in seeing India hold hands literally with China, with Russia, it's a little bit confusing for Americans on both sides of the political aisle who've invested so much in building the defense relationship, facilitating commercial and economic ties, transferring state-of-the-art technologies to India, it creates a little bit of confusion. Um, and India has to decide, at some point, okay, what message do we want to send to Washington? And there's the short-term disagreements, which I think are quite significant. And I don't mean to trivialize, but there are broader interests in play here as well. What happened in June 2020, that can't be undone. The systematic cyber intrusions happening from the northern neighbor. There are serious strategic issues there, one would think, and we shouldn't allow short-term differences between two leaders to really walk back the good work that many have done over 25 years now.
That's very interesting. Ambassador Fabian, do you think China can be trusted? I mean, isn't there a move by China on Arunachal, on Bhutan? It's sitting pretty in the Aksai Chin, which Pakistan ceded to China several years ago. And if we can revisit history, I mean, I think India misread China in the run up to the 1962 war for sure. Even earlier in the 50s, when it's supposed to have rebuffed the British plan to create a Tibetan buffer zone that would have seen, we did not share this longest border with China when it invaded Tibet.
Thank you. Now, before I answer your question about whether China can be trusted, let me make a historical point. What happened on the 2nd of September 1945, which Xi Jinping is celebrating the 80th anniversary of? On that day, in the U.S. ship called Missouri, the Japanese foreign minister came and signed the surrender terms. And that was accepted by General Douglas MacArthur on behalf of the United Nations. Then, after that, representatives of the United States, United Kingdom, France, and China signed. There was no surrender by Japanese troops to China.
I see.
In other words, Xi Jinping has very cleverly celebrated the 2nd of September 1945, something which happened in Japan. Okay?
That doesn't make sense,
since,
you're right.
Since forgetting history is, what shall I say, a growing cottage industry, nobody talks about it. Now, coming to your question, whether China can be trusted, I think it's a wrong question. In diplomacy, we handle problems. We need, of course, trust each other. And what we are looking for are not permanent solutions. Okay, we have some difficulties with the United States. We cannot continue that sort of state of altercation with China. We need their investment. We need, if possible, reduce the number of troops on the border. So that is a very sensible move. Now we also know that between China and Pakistan there's a deep axis.
Yes.
And India is in no position to change it. Let me make it very clear. But taking all that into account, it made very good sense to reach out to China and also to reach out to Russia. But it's not a question of, something which is going to last for so long. No, we will see. We will take it, and we'll do the course correction as necessary. Now, to go back, as I said, it is necessary for India because this will be my last intervention. My charge is going away of my cell phone. It is necessary for India to do whatever it can do to remove the tension, reduce the tension with the United States.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Fabian. Thanks a lot for coming in on the show. Dr. Vivek Mishra, now we've heard what Ambassador Fabian had to say about, China's military support for Pakistan, but the US is now, its military support for Pakistan is now a reality. I mean, is this something that Trump will use to also get India to, follow its line? Because it will prop up the Pakistan army, which is the real power in Pakistan.
Oh, absolutely. The signs are ominous. For one, I think you've had Asim Munir visit Washington, D.C. twice, once hosted by Donald Trump. Second time, he makes a nuclear saber rattling from U.S. soil, which is unprecedented. So I think what is happening, the political miscalculations between the leaderships of Delhi and Washington are something that can be walked back. I'm not so concerned about. But I think the deeper roots inside Pakistan that Trump administration is making is more concerning than the political aspect. Now, for one is, of course, the World Liberty International, which is a cryptocurrency where Pakistan has invested. Pakistan has also founded the Pakistan Crypto Council, which is invested in both the Trump family and the Witkoff family, the Steve Witkoff. And then you have you have an oil deal. You have the first tranche of oil going from the United States to Pakistan in October. And a potential mineral deal somewhere in Balochistan. And I think all of that, if you put that together, that gamut really looks troubling for India in the sense that not that it's directed against India, but I think it's just the dynamic has the potential to create a gaping gap between the United States and India. And I think what has been attempted by Donald Trump is obviously he has doubled down on building relations with Pakistan from a purely economic perspective, but also from a perspective of conflict resolution. I think conflict resolution sits at the heart of what Trump is trying to get at, which is Nobel Prize. And he's looking at the Congo-Rwanda conflict in the Congo, the Sudan conflict, and his claim to have resolved 7 conflicts. And India-Pakistan is, of course, is looking at a conflict as a crown jewel in that list. And has not been able to square that circle. So I think that's really a troubling question which remains outside the purview of Trump still. And therefore, his other strategy, his alternative is to double down on Pakistan, building relationship with Pakistan. Plus, I mean, to be fair to Pakistan, they've done, in Washington, D.C., they've spent much more in lobbying than India has. Now, India has, of course, recent reports suggest that India has significantly increased its lobbying
It's hired 2 more firms.
Yeah. So I think we got to cover the ground there. But I think all of this, if you know that Trump administration functions in a certain way, we should have been more preemptive.
That's very interesting. And the other intriguing part is about China's military parade at Tiananmen. The military, which a lot of analysts are now saying is superior to the US, although Trump says we have the strongest military in the world. Xi Jinping has done a purge of the Chinese military. There's a clutch of generals who've disappeared, 14 new appointments. I mean, all of that is all very well, but China has no real battlefield experience. Even its navy and its many confrontations, in fact, with even the Philippines, it's the Philippines which has come off better, and Japan which has come off better in these confrontations. So would one of you come in and explain to me why we continue to believe that China has a superior military force to the US? Is that still true?
I don't know many people who think that China has a superior military force to the US. Certainly that would come as a surprise to many observers in the US. China's a formidable country, is building military capacity. It's spent extensively on its military modernization, and its real spend is probably significantly higher than the publicly available numbers suggest. Its naval capacity is quite substantial. But all of that said, U.S. force structure, U.S. capacity, in particular, in tandem with its allies all across of Asia, um, has historically been a significant force for peace in the region and continues to be. I'd like to turn back, though, to something that was being discussed earlier. I, I'm not sure I would be so anxious about U.S.-Pakistan military cooperation. The cooperation is pretty limited. It's been symbolic in nature. Um, Everyone in Washington was surprised by the meeting with Munir, the 2 hour lunch session. A number of people probably fell out of their chairs. But we shouldn't read too much from a meeting. It's the U.S. that's again doing military exercises in Alaska with India. It's the U.S. that's doing big ticket defense sales to India with state of the art technologies in play. So let's not read it too much into a few meetings and an artful lobbying effort on the part of Pakistan. The density of military, economic, commercial cooperation taking place is not in the same league at all with what is happening with India. What both countries, I think, India and the US, should probably be concerned about is the growing Pakistan-China cooperation.
Yes.
And we saw this during the 4 days of fighting in May. India was not only fighting Pakistan, let's be candid, it was fighting China as well. It was fighting Chinese military kit, which was used extensively by Pakistan. It was fighting Chinese military intelligence, which was, being supplied in real time to Pakistan. That's where the real threat lies. And that's notwithstanding handshakes or, leader level visits. That's what the people entrusted with national security, and certainly in the US, and I leave it to India to decide for itself, but I would think in India as well, have to be very cognizant of the intense growing military cooperation between those two adversaries.
That's true. That's true. Very well put, Mr. Atman Trivedi. Would you like to make concluding remarks, both of you, because I'm quite running out of time? Where do we see the US-India ties going forward, and will the SCO have this sort of a debilitating effect on these Washington and Delhi mending fences?
Yeah, if I can come in, my sense always has been that the natural trajectory of India in terms of technology, and we are entering a new age of technology, lies with the West, and particularly the United States. And I think these fractures are something that I think are superficial and should be washed away. But because on the other hand, you may have SCO and BRICS, but they do not give you alternatives in technology which can really catapult your growth or other sectors. Even finances. You have a huge trade deficit with China. So you got to be cautious in terms of where you want to step with China and how much in that direction. Plus, you've burnt your fingers in the past with China several times. So I think those are some of the plus, the United States, of course, offers a complete contrast in terms of where the relationship will go on the back of the structural gains that we've made in two decades and a half. So I think that is pretty much pretty clear. But this is a temporary blip, I think, which both sides will come over. Just on the last point, on your last question on China's, there's always been this distinction about China being a brown water navy versus the United States being a blue water navy, right? China's reaches are always in measurement with the coastal gains, and because they have Taiwan as major question in terms of where they, and definitely vis-a-vis Taiwan, they have considerably built their capacities. If you look at the external gains of China in terms of building bases, there's been no development apart from the 2017 Djibouti base in
Yes, that's
Africa.
true. Have they reoccupied the Clark's Air Base in the Philippines?
So I think the US has come back in Clark's. So with, and China does not have a global ambition, and it still believes in winning the war without fighting a bullet. So to that, and that's certainly to the advantage of United States as a global navy. Let me stop there.
That's very well put. Yeah. Atman Trivedi, would you have concluding remarks?
Yeah, I would just encourage both sides, and certainly here in Washington, not to lose sight of the big picture here. This cooperation that has been taking place between the US and India for several decades under multiple parties in the US, under multiple parties in India, it's about shared interests and shared values. Our strategic interests, particularly as it relates to China, are profound and compelling. I think the logic of that cooperation, that strategic cooperation, is very much intact. I am concerned that what has taken place in the last couple of weeks has a significant impact on trust between the two countries. We need to repair that and get back to the cooperation that has been taking place for many decades now. Central to that, again, is the changing balance of power in Asia, China's increasing role, and the reality that China's interests simply do not align with that of India nor the United States. I think Tianjin, there's a tendency to read too much into the photographs. The mistrust between India and China and between the US and China is at this point quite significant. You can't undo the events of May between India and Pakistan and China's centrality. You can't undo what happened in 2020 and in the years preceding that in the high Himalayas. And the two capitals need to keep an eye on the big picture. The relationship is bigger than any leaders, and we need to keep that in mind. We've lost sight of that, and we're allowing now differences about who gets credit on certain issues to take the relationship off track. We need to get the relationship back on track to advance Indian and American interests and our shared values in large part in the region and the world.
Thank you very much, Mr. Atman Trivedi. That was very beautifully put. So basically, we need to also understand what Trump is all about and really address that issue more than anything else, because dealing with a US president who's intent on reviving US manufacturing and reviving his economy is what we need to look at. Maybe that's the biggest challenge before not just India, but Europe and every other relationship that the US has across the globe. Thank you very much, Ambassador Fabian. Thank you very much, Atman Trivedi. And thank you, Mr. Dr. Vivek Mishra, for coming on the show. Thank you, viewers, for watching Global Express. Do click, share, and subscribe.